Have you ever wondered why desire seems to pull us into an endless cycle? At first, it might seem like fulfilling our desires leads to happiness. But if we look deeper, we begin to see a different picture. Now, before we go any further, I want to clarify something. This isn't about seeing things as positive or negative. It's about looking at what exists in between. The space between happiness and sadness, gain and loss, is where the real insight lies. When we fulfill a desire, we feel happiness. But happiness and sadness are not separate. They are two sides of the same coin. Where there is happiness, sadness follows. Why? Because happiness doesn't last forever. The very nature of desire is that it leads to temporary satisfaction, which inevitably fades, turning into longing once again. The problem with this cycle is twofold. There is always a price to pay. Every happiness comes with effort, attachment, and risk. Happiness is impermanent. When it ends, it turns into not happiness, which is sadness, disappointment, longing, or even suffering. To escape this, people seek new sources of happiness, creating an endless loop of chasing desires. This constant search for fulfillment is exhausting, yet many continue because they believe they have managed life well so far and will continue to do so. This leads to the extremeness of eternalism, which we will discuss later. But here's the risk. There is no guarantee that life will always go as planned. This very thirst, this endless craving, is itself a form of sorrow. To illustrate this, consider an example. Imagine a deer that regularly comes to a lake to drink water. One day, a man washes a chemical bottle in the lake, causing the fish in the water to die. Later, the deer returns, sees the dead fish, but unaware of the danger, drinks the water, and suffers greatly. As mentioned earlier, the deer may have believed the same way. It had been drinking from the lake since birth, so it assumed the water was always safe. It did not anticipate any change, leading to its suffering. Who is responsible for its sorrow? Who created this suffering? When faced with suffering, we often ask, who is responsible? Is it oneself? Is it others? Both oneself and others? Neither oneself nor others, but it is spontaneous? Or does it arise by mere chance? This question was once asked to the Enlightened One, and the response was profound. Do not say that. The answer was neither a simple yes nor no, leaving space for deeper contemplation. Then, another question followed. Does sorrow exist? The answer was yes. Don't you see sorrow? The answer was yes, I see it. This conversation led to a deeper question. What is sorrow? The Enlightened One explained that suffering does not arise from a permanent self that has existed since the beginning, nor is it simply created by others. To see this clearly, let's examine two mistaken extremes. 1. If one believes that their suffering is entirely self-made and predetermined, this leans toward eternalism, the idea that an unchanging self continuously accumulates suffering from past actions. If this is true, then there is no escape from suffering as long as we live. 2. If one believes that suffering is entirely caused by others and has no personal connection, this leans toward annihilationism, the belief that there is no continuity or responsibility between actions and their consequences. Both of these views miss the deeper truth. Instead of these extremes, the enlightened one taught the middle way, which explains suffering through a chain of causes and effects. The root of suffering is not a fixed self or external forces alone, but rather ignorance leading to choices and choices leading to further consequences. I will further explain those concepts briefly, just for a quick understanding and completeness of the video. Later, we can explore these concepts more deeply. The chain of suffering. Suffering does not arise randomly. It follows a clear pattern. Understanding this process allows us to break free from it. The chain is as follows. Ignorance leads to volitional choices, which give rise to consciousness. Consciousness shapes name and form, leading to the six senses: contact, feeling, craving, clinging, and becoming. Becoming results in birth, aging, death, and suffering. To end suffering, this cycle must be reversed. Eliminating ignorance, volitional choices cease. When choices cease, consciousness fades, and so does the entire chain, ultimately leading to the end of suffering. Practical steps to overcome suffering. Before we explore practical steps, let's revisit the example of the deer at the lake. What was the answer for that deer? Another question remains. What can we do? 1. Remove ignorance through wisdom. Ignorance is not seeing reality as it is. Wisdom is developed through learning, listening to insights and teachings, reflection, contemplating cause and effect, meditation, direct experience of impermanence, suffering, and non-self. 2. Transform choices through right action. Avoid habitual ignorance by practicing ethical living. Follow moral principles: no harming, lying, stealing, misconduct, or intoxication. Make choices based on wisdom rather than cravings. 3. Purify consciousness through mindfulness. Observe thoughts without attachment. Practice meditation to develop insight into impermanence. 4. Break the cycle of craving through letting go. Develop contentment. Recognize that nothing is worth grasping permanently. Practice generosity. Let go of material attachment. Contemplate death. Understand that everything is temporary. 5. End clinging through non-attachment. See things as they are without craving or aversion. Cultivate equanimity, remaining balanced regardless of circumstances. 6. Transcend suffering through liberation. When ignorance ceases, suffering ceases. Freedom comes not through external achievements, but through understanding and letting go. Desire and suffering are intertwined, but they are not inescapable. By understanding how suffering arises and taking practical steps, we can move beyond the cycle of endless craving and find a deeper peace, one that is not dependent on external conditions. This is a quick discussion. The original story that inspired this may be deeper. So I will include a link to that story below in the description. If you are more interested and want to dig deep, please refer to it, and don't forget to tell us if there is any difference in your understanding in the comments section. If you wish to explore this further, I encourage you to reflect on your own experiences. Notice how desires arise, how they bring temporary joy, and how they inevitably lead to new cravings. By observing this, you may begin to glimpse the possibility of freedom beyond the endless pursuit of satisfaction. And remember, this is just an exploration, an invitation to see things as they are, without judgment, without extremes. The path is yours to walk, in your own time, with your own understanding.